At 9:27 local time, the clock is not just ticking. In 33 minutes, the United States Navy officially seals the Strait of Hormuz. 33 minutes until the legal framework for engagement snaps into place. But the geometry of the water has already changed. 40 Boghammar speedboats from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps have hit the water. They are not waiting. They are moving at 52 miles per hour. The hulls are low-slung fiberglass, slicing a lattice of white water across the shallows. Each boat is a platform of concentrated lethality. 107mm rockets, satchel charges, and enough explosives fixed to the bow to transform a billion-dollar Aegis destroyer into a flaming coffin within seconds. They are operating on a single assumption. They think the American rules of engagement are a cage built of lawyers and time zones. They think the United States will not pull the trigger until the minute hand touches 10. At 9:28, that assumption evaporates. The decision is instantaneous. It is not a radio call. It is not a warning flare. It is a shift in electronic posture. The forward deck of the destroyer erupts. The Mark 41 vertical launch system cycles at maximum rate. A volley of AGM-114L longbow Hellfire missiles streaks into the morning haze. They are not seeking a laser dot. Their internal millimeter wave radar seekers have already locked onto the specific thermal signature of the Boghammar outboard engines. And that is the frozen image we must sit with. The missiles are in flight. The boats are at full throttle. The water is white. The air is heavy with salt and jet fuel. You are watching the moment where everything changes and the clock still reads 29 minutes to go. You need to see this finish because the weight of a global economy is balanced on whether those warheads meet steel or water. If they fail, the Persian Gulf closes. If they fail, the world goes dark. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. We must understand what is at stake here in human and physical terms because the Strait of Hormuz is not an abstract strategic choke point. It is a valve. The width of the navigable channel is roughly 2 miles. Through that narrow funnel flows 1/5 of the world's entire liquid petroleum consumption. That is approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil every single day. If that valve is twisted shut by a minefield or a swarm attack, the price of a gallon of gasoline does not just rise, it explodes. The cost translates directly into the heating of homes in a Chicago winter, the operation of a combine harvester in Kansas, the price of a plane ticket from London to Tokyo. In the first 24 hours of a total closure, the global economy hemorrhages billions. In the first week, strategic petroleum reserves begin to drain. In the first month, the supply chain for plastics, fertilizers, and pharmaceuticals seizes. That is the concrete cost. And the single decision that cannot be undone is the one made in the next breath. The decision to shift to an offensive posture 32 minutes before the official deadline. That is the threshold. Once you cross it, you have changed the nature of the blockade from a show of force to an active kinetic war. The threat is present. It is measured in the rumble of the 57mm deck gun. The unfolding begins at the smallest physical detail closest to the point of failure. That is the millimeter wave radar seeker inside the nose cone of the longbow Hellfire. To understand why this specific variant of the missile is so lethal against a swarm of fiberglass boats, you need an analogy from everyday life. Think of the motion-sensing floodlight on the side of your house. The older light would turn on when a cat walked by or a tree branch swayed. It was a nuisance. But a millimeter wave radar seeker is more like a fingerprint scanner that only triggers for the specific shape and heat of a human thumb. It does not see the wave, it does not see the sky, it smells the heat. If you look at the footage of this engagement, you will notice there are no laser designators painting the targets. The Hellfire is a fire-and-forget weapon. It locks onto the specific exhaust bloom of the Volvo Penta outboard engines pushing those Boghammars. The boats are moving fast, 52 miles per hour. The missile is moving faster, Mach 1.3. One state is a desperate sprint for survival. The opposite state is a supersonic, predetermined intercept. The contrast between the chaotic white wake and the silent, straight smoke trail of the missile is the visual signature of an engagement that is already over the moment it began. Simultaneously, the 57mm Mark 110 cannon on the nearby littoral combat ship or destroyer opens up. This is not the thunderous boom of a battleship's broadside from a World War II film. This is a high-pitched, mechanical thumping, 220 rounds per minute. To visualize this rate of fire, think of a sewing machine needle punching through denim, but each puncture is a 4-pound explosive shell. And these shells are fused for airburst destruction. If you look at the waterline of the approaching boats, you will notice the shells are not striking the hulls. They are detonating 10 feet above the water. The fusing is set to proximity. Why? Because a direct hit on fiberglass might pass straight through and explode harmlessly on the other side. An airburst creates a cone of tungsten fragmentation that turns the entire open-air cockpit into an unsurvivable environment. The crews are not sunk, they are shredded before the hull even takes on water. The precision of this is brutal. The Navy calls it clearing the engagement envelope. By 9:37, the 40-boat swarm is extinct. There are no survivors, only burning oil slicks, sinking fiberglass, and the acrid smell of spent propellant drifting over the Gulf. The preemptive strike has cleared the board. The message is not diplomatic. It is written in the debris field on the surface of the sea, but the primary objective of the 158 warships holding the line is not just shooting speedboats. The strategic objective is the total kinetic removal of Iran's mine-laying capability. This is a different kind of war fought beneath the surface. Iran relies on the EM-52 rocket-propelled mine. This is a weapon that sits on the seabed in the mud and silt. It does not float on a tether like the old spherical mines of the last century. It listens. Here's the analogy for how it works. Think of a neighbor's dog that sleeps all day, completely silent until it hears the specific rattle of your car engine pulling into the driveway. The EM-52 is that dog. It sits inert for months, conserving its battery until it hears the specific acoustic footprint of an American nuclear carrier. The cavitation of the massive screws, the hum of the reactor pumps, that is its wake-up call. When it hears that signature, the rocket motor ignites and it drives upward from the seabed at 60 knots toward the sound. To stop this, the Navy deploys the MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters. If you look at the rear of these massive machines, you will notice a strange sled being towed through the water. This is the AN/AQS-24A mine hunting sled, or the larger influence sweep. They flood the water with a massive electromagnetic pulse and a simulated acoustic roar. The analogy here is simple. Imagine you are trying to find a motion sensor in a dark warehouse. You cannot see it, so you walk down the aisle clapping your hands loudly and banging a metal pipe. The mine hears the sled. The mine thinks a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier is directly overhead. It triggers. The resulting underwater explosion geysers 200 feet into the air, a violent, frothy pillar of white water and mud. The shipping lanes are cleared in massive, controlled bursts. The mine is gone. The cost to the fleet is nothing. The mine stockpile is absolute. Iran attempts to strike back from the coastal cliffs. They launch the Noor anti-ship missile. This is a turbojet-powered weapon traveling at 690 miles per hour, skimming the wave tops at an altitude of just 30 feet to evade radar detection. The contrast is stark. The missile is a low, fast predator. The sea is a vast, indifferent plain, but the Aegis combat system aboard the destroyers is already locked on. If the missile is a predator, Aegis is the entire ecosystem reacting at once. The AN/SPY-1 radar arrays are not just looking at the horizon, they are looking at the space over the cliffs. They track the missiles while they are still climbing. The response is a wave of IRIM-162 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles. These interceptors maneuver at 50 Gs, 50 times the force of gravity. That is faster and harder than any cruise missile on Earth. They collide with the Nord missiles miles out at sea, turning them into fireballs that fall like wounded stars into the Gulf, and anything that slips through the shield of interceptors meets the final line, the phalanx CIWS. If you look at the back of the ship during an engagement, you will notice a white R2 D2-shaped dome spinning with impossible speed. It is not a radar. It is a gun that fires depleted uranium and tungsten at 4,500 rounds per minute. It creates a literal wall of metal. The incoming missile does not just get shot down, it gets shredded into aerodynamic confetti. But this is where the strategy expands from the tactical to the historical. While the world is mesmerized by the fire and the smoke over the Strait of Hormuz, Russia sees an opening. Their strategic goal is simple and ancient: sever the communications link between North America and Europe. They believe that if the political will of the West can be fractured, the blockade fails. They deploy their primary undersea predator, the Akula-class nuclear-powered attack submarine. This is a 360-foot shadow designed to move through the deep sound channel of the Atlantic without making a sound louder than background biology. Escorting the sub is the Yantar, a Russian auxiliary research vessel. But the Yantar is not looking for plankton. She is a mothership for deep-sea submersibles designed to reach the fiber optic cables on the ocean floor. And here we must use the most critical analogy of the entire operation. Think of these cables as the nervous system of a human body. A single strand of glass, no thicker than a garden hose, carrying pulses of light. If you sever the spinal cord, the body dies. These cables carry 97% of all transatlantic internet traffic, trillions of dollars in SWIFT bank transfers, and every encrypted military command. If Russia cuts them, the West goes blind. They think the 158 ships in the Middle East have left the North Atlantic wide open. They think the king is too busy in the desert to see the knife moving toward his throat. This global operation is not just about steel and silicon. It is about the people in the dark. The sonar technicians who spend 18-hour shifts in a lightless room staring at a waterfall display of orange and green noise. The crews of the P-8 Poseidon aircraft flying 10-hour orbits over freezing water, their legs cramping, their ears straining. We see you. And the truth that should chill every adversary of the United States to the bone is this: the entire political firestorm, the public insults on live television, the fractures that paralyzed the news cycle was a lie. It was a manufactured script. We showed the Russians we were leaving the North Atlantic. We publicly ordered our carrier strike groups and P-8 Poseidon aircraft to depart their forward bases in Norway, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. If you look at the public ship tracking websites at 1400 Zulu, you will notice an empty ocean. The withdrawal appears total, but the withdrawn U.S. fleet is not in the Middle East. They are 200 miles off the Irish coast, running under a total electronic blackout called MCON Alpha. Their radars are cold. Their radios are silent. They are listening. The moment the Russian Akula-class submarine crosses the invisible tripwire of the SOSUS array, a network of underwater microphones so sensitive they can hear the seismic groan of an ice shelf breaking apart 1,000 miles away, the trap snaps shut. The lead P-8 Poseidon aircraft kills its engine stealth profile and banks hard. The weapons bay doors snap open. It ejects a high-velocity pattern of 60 SSQ-53G sonobuoys. The canisters hit the water at 250 miles per hour, deploying hydrophones that sink to preset depths. Inside the Akula, a 200 decibel pulse hammers the hull. It is the sound equivalent of a flashbang grenade going off inside a metal filing cabinet. The Russian crew reacts instantly. They shove the diving planes forward, flooding the trimmed tanks to plunge toward 1,600 feet. They are looking for the shadow zone, a thermal layer where cold water meets warm water, bending sonar waves and creating an acoustic blind spot. They think they can hide, but we are already inside the layer. A British Type 23 frigate, which had been running silent on electric motors alone, slams its Type 2087 towed array sonar into active mode. The contrast is unbearable for the Russian crew. One moment, the ocean is a quiet, featureless void. The opposite state is a screaming, piercing ping that illuminates every inch of their hull. The Russian boat responds by launching a salvo of MG-74 Koran 2 decoys. The decoys are clever. They emit a cloud of gas bubbles that mimics the exact acoustic resonance of a submarine hull. But the P-8 Poseidons switch to multi-static tracking. The analogy is this: instead of using one flashlight to find a man in a dark room, you scatter a dozen people around the walls. One person pings. The rest just listen for the specific shadow cast by the man's body. The grid ignores the bubbles. It sees only the massive, dense, steel shape of the Akula trying to hide behind the decoy. The Russian sub executes a high-speed 360-degree turn, a maneuver called clearing the baffles. They are looking for an opening to fire a Type 53 torpedo and blast a hole in the net. They find nothing but more steel. A U.S. Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the USS Donald Cook, appears on their passive sonar, closing at 34 miles per hour. Two Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen-class frigates are flanking. Their AN/SQ S-56 hull sonars are slave to the U.S. data link. The shock finally hits the Russian bridge. The withdrawn Americans are right on top of them. The vast, empty Atlantic was an illusion. For 18 days, the pressure is unrelenting. We deny them the ability to surface for fresh air every time they try to level off to launch their cable-cutting submersibles. A P-8 Poseidon drops a pinger buoy directly onto their escape hatch. The sound of that buoy is not just a detection ping, it is a message. It says a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo is already zeroed on this position. Inside the sub, the atmosphere becomes toxic. CO2 levels rise above safe thresholds. The temperature climbs past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The lithium hydroxide canisters that scrub the air are exhausted. The crew is reaching a total psychological breaking point. They are not just being hunted, they are being suffocated. They are trapped in a 360-foot tube of steel, miles from air with no exit. On the 19th day, the ocean surface finally breaches. The Akula blows its emergency ballast, surfacing in a massive cloud of white foam and compressed air. It is surrounded by a wall of NATO gray hulls and shadowed by the rotor wash of a hovering Seahawk. One of the most advanced nuclear submarines in the Russian inventory was hounded until its crew could not breathe. Forced into a public surrender, the cables were safe. The hunt was over. Back in the Middle East, the 158-ship blockade was an unbreakable cage. Iran attempted its final strategic move, deploying its 3 Russian-made Kilo-class submarines. These are diesel-electric boats, known as the Black Hole because they are nearly silent when running on battery power. Iran believed they could slip under the destroyer's screen and sink a U.S. carrier, ending the blockade in one catastrophic blow. But the U.S. Navy was not hunting with torpedoes in this layer of the water column. They were hunting with the AN/SLQ 32V7 Surface Electronic Warfare Improvement Program. As the Iranian Kilo-class boats moved into the deep water channels, we initiated an electronic suppression operation. The EW system flooded the water, with high-gain modulated acoustic interference. The analogy is this: you are trying to listen for a whispered secret in a quiet library. Suddenly, someone turns on 1,000 car alarms and a heavy metal concert simultaneously inside the same room. We hacked their sonar. The Iranian sonar screens were suddenly filled with thousands of ghost targets. Their fire control computers could not tell the difference between a wave, a whale, or the hull of a U.S. carrier. Then we severed their communication links. The EW suite cut the data flow between the submarines and their shore-based headquarters. The Iranian captains were suddenly blind, deaf, and alone in waters so shallow and rocky that navigating without sonar is a death sentence. They were terrified of hitting the seabed or colliding with an underwater mountain. The pride of their navy was forced to bottom their boats, sitting on the seafloor with the engines off, paralyzed by a technology they could not even see. The subs were neutralized without a single explosive being dropped. They were turned into iron coffins sitting in the mud. We return now to the exact stakes planted in the hook, the clock on the wall, the 9:27 moment, the countdown to an explosion that never came because the Navy refused to wait for it. And the survival of the fleet cost the Iranian Navy its entire fast attack inventory. The deadline was not only met, it was rendered irrelevant. The 158 ships held the line. Iranian oil exports have hit zero. Their economy is in a total tailspin. In the North Atlantic, the Russian Navy has retreated in total humiliation. Their attempt to cut the global communication cables was exposed, countered, and defeated by an alliance they believed was fractured. The political drama was revealed as the most successful strategic deception of this century. The blockade holds, the cables are secure. The entire world runs on the assumption that the sea lanes are open, and on this day, that assumption was enforced by 340 feet of Russian steel surfacing in defeat amidst a ring of silent American destroyers.